What's going on, Faith Chapel family? Hope that you guys are doing well. You guys did such a good job in that game. And I just have to point this out. The winner, that's one of my young adults. So I've discipled really, really well, and I'm pretty proud about that. Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. Hey, if we haven't had the privilege of meeting, my name is Evan, and I am the young adult pastor here. Also on Wednesday nights, I get to hang out with this whole crew. From 4th and 5th to junior high to high school, I just get to walk around this building, and I love NextGen. It is so incredible that we have a church that just highlights and disciples and speaks importance and life into the lives of young people, and you've probably experienced this too. I always think that I'm gonna make such a huge impact on young people, and what I find is they have just as much impact on me, if not more. And so thank you for being a part of our church family and for speaking life into young people. I wanna give you a little bit of personal context for me. I grew up in this church. I love this church in all of its messiness and brokenness. I was discipled here, I was mentored here, I was loved here, and then I met a girl who went here, but we didn't meet here. I don't know how we didn't meet here, but we didn't meet here. We didn't meet until after. But she would say the same thing, that she had leaders and mentors who spoke into her life as well. We've been married for almost 14 years, which is crazy. Thank you. Yeah, which is crazy because as my wife says, we're still 24. So I don't know how. The math is not mathing there, but we've been married for almost 14 years. We have 3 incredible kids, and those kids are in our NextGen ministries. And I don't say this because I collect a check from this church. I say this because I'm a dad who loves his kids, and I'm just so thankful that my kids get to grow up in our NextGen ministries where they are loved and discipled and encouraged towards Jesus. It's such an amazing thing to be here. This morning, I just want to talk to you shortly, and the reason that I tell you because of my personal story isn't because you're dying to know my personal story. Maybe you are, I don't know, probably not. But the reason that I want to talk about that is because we're going to talk about legacy this weekend. And we hear that word legacy, and it probably brings up all kinds of different thoughts and feelings. If you look up the dictionary definition of legacy, it's not really clear. There's lots of different definitions, and if you look online, good luck, because there's gonna be even more. And one of the reasons for that is because we use legacy in so many different ways throughout our culture. But what I wanna do today is just think about a couple different truths when it comes to leaving a legacy. And I know that it can be a little bit difficult to listen to a message after a game and one song, but we're just trying to keep you on your toes, so lock in with me. It's kind of our job as the next generation to make you uncomfortable, right? So we are going to talk about legacy, and we're gonna be in primarily 1st and 2nd Timothy. And a little bit of context about the letters of 1st Timothy. These are written by the Apostle Paul. And the Apostle Paul has written a large part of the New Testament. And these letters, I think it would be pretty easy to argue that they are legacy letters. They are letters that are full of lessons and encouragements and challenges. And whether he's writing to an entire church, like in the book of Philippians or Ephesians, and it's going to be read publicly to a large group of people, or if he's writing a personal letter to somebody like Timothy, he is leaving a legacy. He is somebody who has lived a certain amount of time, and he is trying to make sure that he is imparting wisdom and lessons onto somebody who is coming after him. So 1st and 2nd Timothy are written after the book of Acts, which if you're familiar with the New Testament, it's this collection of descriptions of what the disciples have accomplished for the gospel. They're telling people about Jesus. It's all of these incredible things. And it's most likely written from prison, because Paul spends as much time in prison as he doesn't. The dude is just under house arrest or in prison all the time because he is hell-bent on making sure that people know that Jesus is who he said he is. So we see Paul writing this letter, and what might be a little bit different about these 2 letters to Timothy is that he is facing execution, and it's most likely going to happen this time. So we have a man who understands that he is reaching the end of his life, and so the lessons that he wants Timothy to know are the ones that he is so passionate about communicating. So let's jump in. 1 Timothy chapter 4, verses 11 through 15 says this: "Command and teach these things. Don't let anyone despise your youth, but set an example for the believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Until I come, give your attention to public reading, exhortation, and teaching. Don't neglect the gift that is in you. It was given to you through prophecy with the laying on of hands by the council of elders. Practice these things, be committed to them, so that your progress may be evident to all. So the first point this weekend is we will all leave a legacy. We will all leave a legacy. No matter our age or stage, we have been and will be leaving a legacy. I love that Paul tells Timothy, don't despise your youth. Don't think that because you are young, you cannot leave a legacy. I think it can be really easy for us to wait until maybe like the twilight of our life, maybe the second half of our life or the fourth quarter, however you want to say it, to start thinking about like, what kind of legacy do I want to leave? We should be thinking about this all the time. What kind of legacy am I wanting to leave to those around me? Unfortunately, we don't get to decide what people pick up. If I got to decide all the lessons that my kids learn from me, I would be a really good dad. And if I got to decide only the words that my wife gets to hear and receive them the way that I intended her to receive them, I would be a really good husband. Unfortunately, I'm human and I don't get to decide those things, and so I just am what I am, and you are what you are. And we get to be people who understand that our lives are leaving a legacy, whether we want them to or not. Paul, communicating to Timothy, is simultaneously leaving a legacy for him and also encouraging him in his youth to leave one of his own. So wherever you find yourself, my encouragement would be to start thinking about that. What kind of legacy do you want to leave? I think there can be this temptation for us to think about legacy also as the things that we leave behind, but Paul is really, really clear here. He's saying legacy is way more about the lives that we live than the things that we leave. When he encourages Timothy, he says this, he says, pay attention to the words that you speak, the actions that you take, the love that you display, the faith that you have, the purity you pursue. Those aren't things. Those are lifestyles. Those are things that we are actually doing and living out in our lives. And it can be such a temptation because we want our legacy to be tangible. We want things that represent our love for people. And so we start to think about what we can leave behind, and we start to think about things that you can put your hands on. We start to think about IRAs and 401ks and real estate. What can I leave for those that I love? Now, hear me. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I think that it's important to be practical and smart with those things, and nobody's gonna be mad about those things. We get to think about those things, but what we also need to understand is that when we start thinking about the tangible, the things that we can put our hands on, the things that'll make practical impact in lives, we're usually talking more about inheritance than we are legacy. And I think that in our culture, those two words can be used kind of interchangeably, that we see those as synonyms, but they're not. And I think that if we had a mind shift, we could maybe differentiate between the two. And this would be my argument, is that inheritance is what you leave for others, and legacy is what you leave in others. Legacy is what you leave for others, but inheritance is what you leave for others. Legacy is what you leave in others. At our core, I think that we would all agree that you cannot put a price tag on relationships had, on lessons learned, on lives lived. You can't quantify those things. It's impossible to put a price tag on a relationship. Like when you think about the most important relationships in your life and somebody said, how much is that worth? It's priceless. And what we have to understand is that we are looking to make eternal impact and internal impact way more than we are trying to make temporary impact that will help people while they're here on earth. Our goal is to make heaven crowded, for everybody to know that Jesus loves them and that Jesus has died for them. My parents and my leaders and my mentors, they could leave me $1 million and I wouldn't be angry. I wouldn't be angry about that. But what I also know is that $1 million wouldn't hold a candle to the lessons that I've learned, and the love I've received and the leadership that has been placed in my life. See, inheritance is great, but legacy is better. And our goal is to make an impact with what we leave in people, not what we leave for people. Paul's instructions in this passage end with pay close attention to your life. Pay close attention to your life. And one of my favorite authors is John Mark Comer. He's an incredible pastor and author. And one of the things that he encourages people to do is to live deliberately. 2 words, live deliberately. I love that. Because so often I can be guilty of just kind of taking life as it comes. And I understand, like, we can only control what we can control. Like, there are things that have happened to us that we had no control over. We've lived through like a global pandemic, didn't have a hand in that. Like, we didn't get to decide whether that happened to us or not. Like, we don't get to control every aspect of our lives. But we do get to control some things. And the challenge for each one of us is to take the things that we can control and live with intention. To make sure that we are intentional in our relationships, in our workplaces, in our schools. We get to be people who live deliberately. And if we do that, then what we are doing is we are focusing on instilling really important lessons in one another and those that are coming after us. And saying, I am more concerned with who you are as a person than what I could leave behind. I think if we do that, we will leave a worthwhile legacy. Next, let's look at a word from Paul's second letter to Timothy. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1-3 says this. You therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. What you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, commit to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Share in suffering as a good soldier of Christ Jesus. The second point is this, is that we are all living within a legacy. So we are all getting the opportunity to leave a legacy, but we are also simultaneously living within a legacy. And in this passage, Paul is reminding Timothy that he was getting an opportunity to live well within the legacy that was given to him. If you look at both 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy, Paul doesn't just talk about himself. Even in this passage, he talks about the elders that laid hands on Timothy and prayed for him. But there are multiple instances through the 2 letters where he reminds Timothy of the people who have come before him and saying, hey, remember your family, remember your friends, remember the people that have gone before you. Paul is encouraging him to remember the lessons that he is being taught so that he then can take those lessons and teach others. I think it can be really easy for us to get so wrapped up in leaving a legacy that we forget that we are currently being given the opportunity to honor those who have come before us. We get so focused on us and what we want people to garner from our lives that we stop honoring the lives of those who have come before us. Sometimes we just have to be reminded. We have to be reminded that someone did in fact leave a legacy for us. And some of us hear that and we swell with pride and we think about all the people who made an impact in our lives. And some of us hear that and go, no, I don't think anybody left a legacy for me. I think that when it comes to legacy, I was given the short stick. Nobody loved me, nobody encouraged me, nobody pushed me towards Jesus. And I understand that in a family of believers or a church like this, where we have people who are spiritually unresolved, to people who've been following Jesus for a really long time, to people who feel like they had a great legacy left for them, and people who didn't, the pendulum swings really dramatically in both directions. But for a moment, I just want to tell you, and I've already said this, but I just want to tell you this, is that I have been blessed so much by the people who have come before me. In fact, when I was preparing this message, I was in a coffee shop and I had my AirPods in and I was just really trying to focus on getting the message done. And just the most comforting thing in the world is when you're completely lost in thought and music, somebody putting their shoulder on you in a public place. And somebody walked up behind me and put their hand on my shoulder. And I was just like, oh no, like what's happening right now? And I turn around and it's a guy who was one of my leaders when I was in junior high. And we started to have a conversation. We did all the small talk, right? Like, how are the kids? How's your wife? Like all of the things that you do. And then he's like, what are you doing? I was like, well, in fact, I'm writing a message for this weekend's services. And he said, well, what's it about? We talked about legacy. And over the course of 10 minutes, we probably talked about at least a dozen people who had made such a huge impact in our lives. Some people who had made an impact on both of our lives, some who had just made an impact on one of our lives or the other. I got to tell him that he had an impact on my life. And it was just this beautiful moment. But it was crazy as we were just having this conversation to think about the dozens of people that made an impact, and it just made me want to be a part of those people for others. Not so that I could be remembered, but so that people would say, it was because of something that you did, a lesson that you taught, that I got closer to Jesus. We get to live within other people's legacies. And like I said, I know that some of you might not resonate with that. Maybe you're like, that's a really good story, Evan. I'm glad that you had that, but I didn't. Human beings are messy. And there's not a single human legacy that is not blemished, that is not full of imperfections, except one. And thankfully, that is the legacy that we all get the opportunity to share in. And that's the legacy of Jesus. That God made flesh, came and dwelt among us and lived the life that we could not live, died the death that we could not die, and said, come follow me. The beauty of the gospel is that Jesus didn't just come do things, but he also had a consistent invitation. Come be a part of this. Come follow me. Come apprentice with me. And so no matter where we find ourselves, whether we had a really good legacy left for us or a poor one, we all get to tether ourselves to the legacy that Jesus left. And we get to look at the lessons that he wants to instill in us. We get to follow his example, and we get to say, no matter what kind of human legacy was left for me, Jesus cared enough to leave me a perfect one. What a privilege it is that God put on flesh and dwelt among us. So, we are all creating legacies, and we are all living within legacies. Lastly, I would love for us to understand this final truth. Legacy is both individual and collective. Legacy is both individual and collective. In the book of Hebrews, the author takes chapter 11 and just lays out all of these incredible things that people did. It says, this person by faith accomplished this. It's just individual accolade over individual accolade. It's just incredible. And you get to see this beautiful history of people who followed God. At the end of chapter 11, it says, and this doesn't even give me time to talk about all of these other different people. That all of these people have come before you and they have been faithful to honor the call on their lives. And he just lists all these people. It's amazing. And then in chapter 12, the author says this, verses 1 through 2. It says, therefore, since we also have such a large cloud of witnesses surrounding us, let us lay aside every hindrance and the sin that so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that lies before us, keeping our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy that lay before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. A great cloud of witnesses with their eyes fixed on Jesus. The beautiful thing is that you and I get the opportunity to be a part of a great cloud of witnesses. I'm going to invite the band back out, and we're going to close with worship this weekend. But as we do that, I think that we need to think about the fact that we get to be a part of a great cloud of witnesses. I think we absolutely have to be aware of the fact that we get the opportunity to make individual impact on people. But one of the things that we hold on to strongly is that we can make more of an impact together than we can as singular individuals. I think that we need to think about regularly what kind of legacy we want to leave as a church, what kind of legacy we want our families to leave. And we're made up of individuals who get to make those individual impacts, but we get to make a collective legacy for Jesus. When people think about this church, when people think about your family, when people think about your friend groups, whatever it may be, what kind of legacy are you getting to leave? Psalm 145, the psalmist says this, one generation shall commend your works to another. One generation shall commend your works to another. One of the things that I love about our church is that we are multi-generational. There are so many different generations represented within the church body. And as we worship, as we engage with one another throughout the week, we get to be a church where one generation commends the works of God to another. And that means that you get to commend the works of God to the generation that's coming after you, and it means that you get to commend the generations that are going before you. We get to be people who talk about Jesus, who encourage people towards Jesus. So together, in all of our messiness, in all of our blemish and imperfection, let's spend some time worshiping Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, the one who's worthy of all of our praise. Let's worship.